I mean, it's a good day, I think, for you to come on, because last time I saw you reported 0 fatalities for the first time since March. At the same time, you have postponed indefinitely the phase 3 reopening. Why the caution when the numbers seem to be doing so well for Connecticut right now?
Nice to see you, David. We've got about 95% of our economy open right now. But when it came to bars and nightclubs and big entertainment venues, I listened to governors from Florida and Texas and the such saying they regret that they did open their bars when they did. And that was an opportunity for some super spreading to go on. We don't want that to happen. So in abundance of caution, we're not going to open them yet.
Well, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as I recall, which makes good sense. How concerned are you about people outside of Connecticut? Certainly some surrounding states, even New Jersey now seems to be ticking back up, but certainly in the South and the Southwest, there are concerns about people coming from those locations into the states up here in the Northeast. How concerned are you about that? I know you have a quarantine in place. Is that advisory, or can you enforce that?
I'm very concerned. Thankfully, we got good neighbors. Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, they have low infection rates. But you're right. If people are flying up from Miami, flying up from Houston, coming in unchecked, that's a problem. You need 1 or 2 people infected on that flight by the time it lands. Who knows what's going to happen? So we do have a quarantine in place. It is voluntary. That is true. But I'll tell you, the number of people flying into our state from those infected areas has dropped quite a bit, which is the precaution we wanted.
Governor, where are you on masks? I mean, some people are going to like mandatory masks now. Where are you in Connecticut, and you as governor of Connecticut?
Yeah, we have said for indoor use, for stores and the such, you have to wear the mask. That's the rule. And I was sort of interested, David, reading today that the National Retail Association said, I'm tired of having 50 different rules for when it comes to masks. Have a national standard, say masks are required inside the stores. That would make our lives a lot easier. That's the National Retail Association.
And most public health officials agree that that's one of the things that we could do to really save lives, save people from infection, but even save people's lives. So what's the hesitancy? Have you talked with federal officials about the possibility of a federal standard on this?
They're reluctant to have federal guidance on things like that. You've got to ask them. The messaging coming from Washington has been a little confusing for us. That's why we as governors here in the Northeast like to speak with one voice so we could have a consistent message.
One of the things we've heard a lot about is certainly testing, but contact tracing as well. I saw a report having to do with Connecticut that suggests you could reach out to 97% of the people who are infected, but only 47% would agree to participate in the contact tracing. Is that a problem for the contact tracing to really be effective?
That is a problem. We now have the infrastructure in place. As you point out, we can reach out to just about everybody in a real time. We do it by telephone, we do it by text. We try and say, look, if you care about the family, you care about the friends, the people you've been in contact with, please let us know who they are. But there is some hesitancy out there. Young people are at the party, don't want other people to know who was at the party, that type of thing. And we're working with the communities to impress upon people how important it is you share this information.
What is your policy at this point on the schools reopening? This is certainly something President Trump is focused on. Yesterday, he really said he was going to urge governors like you to make sure you open your schools. We had Vice President Pence out again today. At the same time, we had Mayor de Blasio here in New York City saying, if we do this, it's going to be like 2 or 3 days a week kids can go to school. Where are you in Connecticut?
Because we have an infection rate less than 1%, because we're meeting all the metrics, we are planning to open our schools on time in late August, September, a normal school day, so there's not a lot of back and forth, some days on, some days off. I think that's better for the kids and certainly for the employers and getting our economy going again. They'd like to know what the work schedule is of the people who are working for them.
Are you going to test employees, at least if not students, before they go back?
Right now, that's not the CDC guidance, but we do have 160 testing centers. They're available free of charge, symptomatic or non-symptomatic. So for those teachers that want to be tested, we're going to make sure they have that opportunity.
Governor Lamont, we all hope this goes beautifully for Connecticut and for the rest of us, for that matter. At the same time, do you have contingency plans? Do you have contingency plans that you could cut back again in some schools at least if there are problems and go to a remote learning?
I'm afraid we do, David. I mean, we've seen how fast this flare-up can spread like wildfire, looking at other states. So we have told K through 12, make sure we have a contingency plan, and in particular our colleges. I mean, they're thinking hard about how they might have to move back to online learning if, in fact, there was a flare-up in the residence halls and the such. I think it's terrible, by the way, that you're not going to let foreign students attend our great universities here in Connecticut if it involves distance learning. That sends the wrong message, and that's coming right out of Washington.
Well, as you suggest, Governor, you have some pretty big, important universities there in the state of Connecticut. How are they doing? What's going to happen to them financially, given what's happening right now? Because you have both increased costs and perhaps reduced revenue.
They're losing money in the residence halls in particular, where they can't be at full occupancy to maintain some distancing there. But right now, I believe all of our colleges, public and private, are getting going in August. They're going to start with some distance learning to get people up to speed, move people into the dorms slowly, maybe over 2 or 3 weeks, so there's not a mad rush going in there. And they plan to have a mix of online as well as in-person classes, knowing that they may have to take a turn if there was a flare-up.
Governor, when you were last with us, you said that you thought perhaps the days of the routine 5-day-a-week commute from Connecticut into Manhattan may be over. What changes and patterns have you seen since then? Has that reinforced your view, or do you have a somewhat different view?
No, David, it really has reinforced our view, especially in southern Connecticut, where a lot of people would get on the train, then they get on the subway. There's a lot of reluctance about getting on the train, a lot of reluctance about getting on the subway. And I think people have found that you can have a nice suburban lifestyle, or maybe live in one of our small towns or Stamford, Connecticut. You can work out of there 2 or 3 days a week. And if you have to get into the Big Apple to take care of business, you could do that, but you don't have to live there.
What longer-term changes besides the commuting issue you just raised are you taking a look at right now? I'll give you another example. There are a lot of reports of people in Manhattan looking for houses up in Greenwich, up in southern Connecticut, and out in New Jersey. And what's going on with the real estate market right now?
The real estate market is very, very busy. People coming from New York, people coming from Boston. I think if they feel like this may not be the end of the end when it comes to the nature of self-quarantining, if you have a house with a little backyard, or you can get a couple of extra rooms at less cost than perhaps Brooklyn, it's a pretty good place to be. So I think you're going to see a dynamic change. Let's face it, for the last 20 years, young people wanted to be in the major metro centers. Now I think there'll be a little balancing out.
Well, Adam Smith would say that when there's increased demand, the price is going to go up. Are you seeing home real estate prices go up in Connecticut?
I think you are seeing some of that. Yeah, we've been pretty flat, as you know, for the last 15 years. So there's still a steep discount for Connecticut compared to New York City, for example. But you're right, there's a lot of demand, and I think you're going to see that reflected in prices.
So, Governor, let's talk about what, if anything, the state of Connecticut needs from the federal government. There's talk about another phase of stimulus or investment, shoring up the economy coming perhaps later this month. You've said you don't think necessarily we should be extending that $600 supplemental unemployment insurance claim. Why is that?
I'm trying to do everything I can to get people back to work safely. That's how we're going to get our economy going again. That's how I'm going to stabilize finances in our state. So I thought, look, there are other ways you can use those federal dollars rather than just true up the unemployment. For example, you know, we've lost hundreds of millions of dollars just because not just our income tax revenue, but our sales tax revenue is down a lot due to COVID-enforced restrictions. And we've got to be prepared for that. Thankfully, we have a big rainy day fund, so we can power through for the near term. But if this lingers on for another year, we're all in big trouble. So I really need the federal government to step up and help out the state and local governments and give us more guidance on education as well.
So it's great that you have a rainy day fund. It'll tide you over for a little bit. When does it really start hitting you? If you don't get some direct support from the federal government for the Connecticut budget, when do you start having to cut costs? And let's be frank, that's often laying off people.
Well, we're already trimming. There's no question about that in anticipation. I think Connecticut's in good shape through this calendar year, maybe a little beyond that, depending on what the balance is. We're assuming as our economy gets back towards normal or close to normal by the end of this calendar year, well, Connecticut will be in good shape. If this falls over, if there's another big flare-up in November, we'll see what happens.
Governor, obviously this pandemic and the economic problems that have followed the pandemic are a big crisis. We also have had a crisis in this country having to do with systemic racism following the heels of that tragic killing of George Floyd. Tell us what is going on in Connecticut. I understand you may be calling the General Assembly into special session to address some of at least the policing issues.
We're definitely going to do a police accountability bill as part of our special session in the next couple of weeks. We tried to lead by example with our state police and make sure that when it came to community policing, take out the militarization, focus on the community policing. And I was really pleased that during some really important protests in and around the George Floyd murder, our state police were also often arm in arm with the protesters. We had very few arrests, very little violence. And for that, I was thankful that the police and the protesters were, in many cases, aligned, at least in terms of their goals.
What about the more fundamental underlying issues, besides the policing of some of the inequality, economic inequality, income and wealth, that we have across the entire country? You also have a version of it in Connecticut. What can we do to address some of those issues that really set up perhaps the police and the police for failure?
Yeah, two big focuses for me in our state is one, education. We have one of the biggest achievement gaps between extraordinary suburban schools and some of our city schools that we've got to make investments in. We need more social workers. We need more social support, as well as STEM and coding. So we're making a big effort to upgrade those opportunities there for each and every one of those kids, especially the ones in the cities. And secondly, we put a lot of money into new business startups, especially for people of color, making sure they get that opportunity. We have a $45 million fund. I think 38% of it went right to people of color to make sure they can power through and start up their business and achieve their dreams.
Yeah, fascinating. Finally, Governor, let me ask you about voting come November. We've got a big election coming up. What's the situation in Connecticut with respect to absentee voting, mail-in voting? It's a big controversial subject, as you know, across the country.
Why is it so controversial? A majority of states do it. Red states, blue states is not particularly partisan. Obviously, in this environment, everything is getting partisan. In our state, look, I'm telling people over the age of 60, I'm telling people with pre-existing conditions, stay safe, stay home. And that means we got a primary in August. That means we have an election in November. And I want to make sure they can exercise their rights through absentee balloting. So we've got a little push and pull on that, but I think we're going to get that passed.
And do you need something through the General Assembly to get that done? And if so, when does it get enacted so people know how they're going to be able to vote?
Yeah, I have emergency powers, so I can do it for August. But when it comes to the November election, I need the legislature to step up and say, if you feel like you have some health risk, you don't have to go wait in a long line at a voting booth. We'll do absentee balloting for you, no questions asked. And I noticed that the CDC just recommended the same. That's good news.
So, Governor, I told you finally I'm going to fib to you now because we got a question from a viewer that I really want to ask you. One of the viewers wrote in and said, how's your pension system doing up in Connecticut?
We need some work there. There's no question about it. The politicians made big promises, didn't put money into the pension for 40 years. We have an unfunded liability. That said, we're pushing through some reforms. We have a fair number of people that are going to be retiring in the next year or so, and we're managing it. The main thing I'm trying to do is hold down the increase in costs so our fixed costs become a smaller and smaller piece of our budget over the coming years.